There is a very strange, um, almost poetic thing about the actual physical properties of water.
Oh, right. Yeah, the fluid dynamics of it.
Exactly. It's like if you just cup your hands together, right,
Yeah.
and you just hold it gently, the water stays right there. It pools. It just rests in your palms.
It conforms to the shape.
Right. But the second you panic, or, the second you try to exert absolute control over that water
Mhm.
and you squeeze your hands into a tight, clenched fist, you completely lose it.
You squeeze it right out.
Yes. The tighter you squeeze, the more violently the water shoots out through the invisible cracks between your fingers. It's just physics.
Well, and it's the ultimate paradox of authoritarianism, too. I mean, whether we are talking about politics or culture or even just, basic psychology,
Right.
the very act of attempting to enforce total rigid compliance, it actually generates the exact internal pressure that shatters the system.
And that image, that a clenched fist, desperately losing its grip on the actual fluid reality of human nature, that is the perfect entry point for us today. So welcome to the Morning Roundup.
Thrilled to be diving into this one.
Yeah, this is our daily deep dive where we take the day's massive, frankly chaotic stack of sources, articles, lectures, cultural critiques, and we strip away the noise.
We try to find the thread.
Exactly. We thread them together to uncover the hidden themes actively shaping our world. And our reading list today it is staggering in its variety.
It really is. I mean, we are weaving together an MIT OpenCourseWare lecture on game theory, for starters.
Which is heavy on its own.
Yeah, very heavy. And then psychological insights from Jordan Peterson on, the archetype of the father. We've got incredibly sharp critiques of modern Disney remakes.
The underlying philosophical theology of J.R.R. Tolkien, too.
Right, and Slavoj Zizek's blistering critiques of modern academia. Plus, this bizarre internet subculture known as the orthobro.
Which we will definitely get into. So let's unpack this immediately. What is the central nervous system connecting MIT mathematics to internet subcultures and Disney movies?
It's a wide net.
It is. We are calling today's thematic thread the rebellion of the real. Because across all levels of society right now, we are witnessing this profound, unavoidable clash.
The total collision.
Right. On one side, you have organic human nature. This is our innate, messy desire for genuine freedom, the physical reality of the biological family, deep embodied friendships, and, those ancient foundational myths.
And then on the other side, you have these artificial, incredibly brittle systems of control.
Yes. And before we jump into the deep end here, I want to be entirely transparent with you listening out there. Because this clash touches on the most intimate aspects of how we construct our lives.
Oh, absolutely. Family, gender, religion, politics.
Right. So some of the commentary we're dissecting in this deep dive is highly politically charged. You are going to hear blistering arguments from both the political left and the political right today.
And our job here is not to pick a side.
Never. We are not taking sides,
Yeah.
and we are not endorsing these specific viewpoints. Our mission is just to impartially hold up the arguments contained in the source material to the light.
To take them apart and see how they work.
Exactly, to help you understand the broader cultural tectonic plates that are shifting beneath our feet. We present the architecture of the arguments, and, you decide what to do with them.
So let's start by analyzing the nature of that clenched fist you mentioned. To understand how control operates and ultimately fails, we're actually starting with a really brilliant piece of cultural analysis from the channel Filmalysis.
Oh, yeah. This is about the show Andor, right?
Exactly, focusing on the underlying philosophy of Andor. Now, Andor is ostensibly a Star Wars prequel series, but Tony Gilroy, the showrunner, he has infused it with this stunningly sophisticated philosophy of historical revolution.
Because Gilroy is apparently just a voracious consumer of history. I mean, from the Roman Republic to the French, Iranian, American revolutions, he reads it all.
Right. And Filmalysis zeroes in on a specific element of the show. There's this manifesto written by a young rebel thinker named Karis Nemec.
Oh, Nemec's manifesto.
Yeah, and Nemec basically boils down the physics of rebellion into two foundational ideas. First, he writes that freedom is a pure idea that occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
Like it's the baseline human operating system.
Exactly. But the counterweight to that spontaneous freedom is Nemec's really brilliant observation on tyranny. He writes that the imperial need for control is so desperate, specifically because it is so unnatural.
Right. It takes effort.
It requires constant, exhausting effort. He says, quote, "It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle."
There it is. There is the water escaping the fist. It leaks.
Yeah. And if you study the anatomy of actual historical revolutions, they all share a nearly identical skeleton. You have a state fiscal crisis, right?
Yeah.
Followed by elite defection.
People at the top bailing out.
Right. And finally, a popular coalition. These systems collapse because the state attempts to mathematically account for too many variables. The universe is inherently chaotic. You just cannot engineer a society to completely eliminate the unpredictable nature of human desire.
And Formalysis points out how the visual language of Andor reinforces this perfectly. Like if you look at the Empire's spaces, the interrogation rooms, the Imperial apartments, they are unnaturally sterile.
Just stark white and gray.
Yes, white, rigid, industrial, completely devoid of life. But in stark contrast, the rebels operate in these really organic, historically grounded environments.
Ancient stone pyramids, wooden encampments.
Textured brick cities, right?
Yeah.
But the ultimate metaphor for this clash in the show is this event called the Eye of Aldhani.
Oh, this is beautiful. The Eye of Aldhani is a breathtaking celestial phenomenon. It's a naturally occurring meteor shower that passes through the atmosphere exactly once every 3 years.
Like clockwork.
Right. Millions of crystalline meteors swarm together, they heat up, and they explode across the sky in this absolute riot of color and energy.
As Nemec describes it, he says, from the ground, it's a thing of beauty, and the sky is chaos.
And the genius of the writing there is that the rebels use this massive, totally uncontainable natural event as visual and sensory cover for a heist. They rob the Empire.
Because the Empire is powerless against it.
Exactly. They've built endless fleets of TIE fighters, they have unlimited surveillance, but they are utterly powerless to stop a meteor shower. You cannot police the cosmos.
You can't put handcuffs on a meteor. And so the Eye of Aldhani is this perfect analog for revolution itself. When a system becomes too oppressive, revolution is a natural, recurring, and inevitable phenomenon.
Up close in the sky, it is terrifying and chaotic, but from a historical distance, from the ground, it has an undeniable purifying beauty.
Right. The characters in the show constantly refer to the rebellion as a fire or a spark, a sunrise. These are natural forces burning away an artificial structure.
Right.
But let me pause you right there because I want to challenge this metaphor a little bit when we apply it to our actual modern political reality.
Okay, go for it.
In Andor, the Empire is a very active, very aggressive, passionate evil. It is a very deliberate clenched fist. But is modern bureaucratic control actually that active?
That's a good question.
Because I look at modern governance, and it doesn't feel like a passionate tyranny. It feels empty. It feels like a spreadsheet.
That is a crucial distinction, and it transitions us perfectly into our next source. This is an audio essay from Morgoth's review, and he explores a concept he has termed esoteric Starmerism.
Referring to the current UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Right. But this isn't just about British politics. It is a diagnosis of the entire modern Western bureaucratic state.
And Morgoth's core argument here is fascinating because he notes that almost everyone across the entire political spectrum views Starmer as an absolute void of charisma.
Oh, completely void.
There's no grand, sweeping, villainous ideology there. He is just, he's just empty.
But that emptiness is his superpower, and it is the superpower of the modern state. Because he is a void, he acts as a perfect, terrifying mirror for the public's political anxieties. Yeah, Morgoth breaks down how every single political faction just projects their deepest nightmares onto this blank canvas.
Right, so the working class right looks at this dull politician, and somehow they see a Stalinist dictator plotting to establish a totalitarian police state.
Exactly. And the liberal left looks at him and sees a boring, uncultured manager who completely lacks any progressive vision.
While the hard left watches his response to protests and literally labels him a fascist.
Yeah, Morgoth points out a very strange phenomenon here. There's this grudging, almost cynical respect emerging from the hard right, not because they agree with him at all,
Right.
but because they finally understand what he is. Starmer is the pure, unadulterated manifestation of proceduralism. He is the ultimate avatar of the bureaucratic machine.
Because he doesn't lose sleep over the fact that the public hates him. He doesn't feel the moral weight of his own unpopularity because the machine doesn't have feelings.
In a society where all the traditional forms of higher morality have been systematically hollowed out, the church, traditional community values, a shared national mythos, the state is the only architecture left standing.
And the state has no external moral framework?
None. Its only imperative is to perpetuate its own existence. Morgoth describes this approach to governance as almost entirely autistic in its application of the law.
Like a robot.
Yeah. If a think tank engineers a new legal loophole, it is executed without an ounce of human emotion or moral hesitation.
So the threat isn't a Sith Lord plotting in the shadows. The threat is just a guy with a law degree mechanically executing the bureaucratic manual without ever asking if the manual is actually good for the human soul.
It is the absolute banality of control.
Right. Which naturally leads us to a massive structural problem.
Hmm.
If the modern system is just a void procedural rules, a giant unfeeling algorithm, how do human beings actually navigate it?
Because human beings are emotional, moral, and organic.
Exactly. The state expects us to behave like perfectly rational economic widgets. But we aren't widgets.
We really aren't. And to understand the collision between those bureaucratic expectations and human reality, we have to look at the underlying mathematics of human behavior.
Which brings us to the MIT lecture.
Yes. Ian Ball's MIT OpenCourseware lecture on game theory breaks this open perfectly. Now, my traditional understanding of game theory was always just people trying to outsmart each other.
Like poker or chess.
Right. But Ball defines it very specifically as interactive decision theory. It is the study of mathematical models mapping conflict and cooperation.
Okay.
But the first thing Ball does is redefine the word rational. When economists or mathematicians call a decision rational, they are not passing a moral judgment. They aren't even saying it's an objectively smart choice.
So what does it mean?
Rationality in game theory simply means consistency.
Oh, I see. Right. If my stated preference is that I absolutely love burning my own money and I consistently throw my paychecks into a bonfire, I am acting rationally according to the mathematical model.
Exactly. You are consistently pursuing your preference.
Even if the preference is insane.
Right. But the complication arises because these decisions are interactive. You're not operating in a vacuum. Your ability to achieve your preference is entirely dependent on anticipating the actions of everyone else in the system.
And this is where Ball introduces the Keynesian beauty contest experiment.
Which I have to admit, absolutely broke my brain when I watched it.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So he asks a lecture hall of MIT students to pick a whole number between 1 and 100.
Okay.
And the winner is the person whose guess lands closest to exactly 2/3 of the class average.
Okay, the psychological layering of this game is just incredible. Let's walk through the logic for your listening, because it gets deep.
Let's do it.
A completely naive player might assume everyone else is going to guess completely randomly, right?
Right.
And if choices are random, the average of 1 to 100 is roughly 50. 2/3 of 50 is roughly 33. So a smart first-level thinker guesses 33.
But wait, these are MIT students.
If you know everyone else in the room is also smart enough to do that exact math, you have to assume the new class average is going to be 33.
And 2/3 of 33 is 22. So the really smart play is 22.
But if they know that they know that, the infinite regress begins. You assume the new average is 22, so you guess 14.
And if you follow this logic all the way down to the bottom, the only mathematically perfect equilibrium answer is 0 or 1.
Right. So what happened when they actually played it in the lecture hall?
The winning number in the first round was 24.
Wow.
Yeah. So they discussed the underlying math, they realized the trap, and they played it a second time. The winning number dropped to 14. The group learned and adjusted.
But Ball highlights the one variable that destroys perfectly sterile bureaucratic models.
Oh, this is the best part.
Not everyone's preference is to win the game.
Yes. Some students deliberately guessed 100 just to be chaotic. They didn't want the prize money. They literally just wanted the satisfaction of ruining the professor's data set.
Which is such a human thing to do.
It really is. The model assumes everyone is trying to maximize their economic utility. But human beings often prioritize spite, humor, or just pure rebellion over winning.
And this introduces the crucial distinction between ordinal utility and cardinal utility, specifically regarding risk aversion.
Okay, break that down.
Ordinal utility is just ranking things. Like, I prefer option A over option B, simple. But when uncertainty and real stakes are involved, we use cardinal utility.
Okay.
This measures the intensity of your preference by assigning a numerical value to your choices.
And Ball gives a very grounded example for this. You have to decide whether to walk home or take the subway. The sky is gray. You have to assign a probability to the chance of rain and then mathematically weigh the utility of walking in the fresh air against the absolute misery of getting soaked.
But it's the financial example that really exposes human nature here. Ball asks the class to choose between two options. Option A is a 100% guaranteed payout of exactly $10.
Guaranteed $10.
Right. Option B is a 99% chance of winning $1,000 divided by 99, which, if you do the math, mathematically equates to an expected value of roughly $10.10.
Right. So from a purely mathematical, bureaucratic standpoint, option B is the superior choice. It has a higher expected monetary value. The algorithm says you should always pick option B.
But almost every single human being on Earth will choose option A.
Every time.
Why? Because human beings are deeply risk-averse. Our utility function, the way we experience value, is not a straight line that correlates perfectly with money. It is concave. We place an immense mathematically irrational premium on certainty, safety, and stability.
And let's tie this back to the void of Starmerism, the bureaucratic state we were just talking about.
Yeah, bring it together.
The machine operates under the assumption that humans are perfectly predictable economic units who will always act to maximize their mathematical utility. But we don't. We value organic things that refuse to fit on a spreadsheet. We value spite, we value guaranteed safety, we value loyalty and love and myth. When a highly structured, sterile system attempts to force those jagged organic preferences into a perfectly square hole, the system breaks. It leaks.
And if human behavior relies on these organic, really hard to quantify interactions, we have to look at what happens when the primary environment for those interactions is actively dismantled.
Which is the family.
The most fundamental organic unit of human life is the family, and modern culture is currently engaged in a massive project to re-engineer it.
And we have two profound pieces of analysis on this shift in the stack today. The first comes from Jester Bell, who conducts a really surgical dissection of the thematic shifts in modern Disney films.
And this matters because for almost a century, Disney has been the primary architect of family-centric morality in global pop culture.
Yeah, they literally defined the childhood moral framework for generations.
Right, and
Yeah.
if you analyze the classic Disney Renaissance, the central tension is almost always generational.
Like Ariel rebelling against King Triton's oppressive rules.
Exactly. Or Remy the Rat in Ratatouille rebelling against his father's grim, garbage-eating survivalism. Nemo rebelling against Marlin's suffocating fear.
But the crucial element of those classic stories is the resolution. The rebellion was never the actual end goal. The resolution was always synthesis.
Right.
The child learned the harsh realities of responsibility. The parent learned the necessity of letting go, and the family unit was fundamentally restored and strengthened. The family was the ultimate prize.
But Jesterbell argues that this core paradigm has been radically inverted in recent years. The new thematic priority is radical, untethered individualism and careerism, often explicitly at the expense of family cohesion.
And she points to the upcoming live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch as the prime symptom of this disease.
Oh, this was so illuminating. Think about the original animated Lilo and Stitch. The entire emotional core of that movie is an older sister, Nani, violently fighting to keep her broken family together after their parents die.
Right. And the government social worker, Cobra Bubbles, he is the initial antagonist, precisely because he represents the cold, bureaucratic state threatening to sever the organic family bond.
The entire thesis of the film is literally spoken aloud. Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
But Jester Bell points out that the live-action remake completely recontextualizes this dynamic. The leaks and script details indicate that Nani is subtly framed as being in the wrong for sacrificing her college ambitions to raise her little sister.
Wow.
Yeah. The government social worker is no longer an intimidating force of bureaucracy, but is portrayed in this warm, matriarchal, positive light. The film heavily emphasizes Nani's untapped potential as a marine biology student.
So the ending is entirely inverted. Instead of fighting to stay together, Nani abandons Lilo to go to college out of state.
And Lilo actually encourages her to prioritize her personal dreams over their family bond. The bureaucratic state is vindicated as the proper caretaker, and familial self-sacrifice is framed as a tragic mistake.
That is wild. And Jesterbell notes this is a pervasive pattern across Disney's newly acquired properties, too. Take The Devil Wears Prada.
Great movie.
Classic. The original film is a classic morality play. Andy realizes that the toxic, glamorous fashion industry is systematically destroying her friendships and her romantic relationships, so she walks away. She chooses her soul over her career.
But now Disney is producing The Devil Wears Prada too.
Right.
And the premise, Andy has regressed completely into a corporate workaholic. The characters, including Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley, openly and flippantly praise the decision to prioritize the fashion industry over their own children and marriages.
It's a complete 180. Gesturville even highlights Toy Story 4, where Bo Peep effectively convinces Woody to abandon his deeply ingrained loyalty to his kid, Bonnie.
Right. The noble pursuit of duty is framed as a prison, and Woody leaves to become an independent, quote-unquote, free toy.
The unified message across all these cultural products is unmistakable. Self-actualization, independence, and career success are the highest moral goods, and familial duty is just an oppressive relic.
But I have to ask the cynical question here for the listener. Is this just a bunch of Hollywood writers projecting their own therapy sessions onto scripts? Or is there a larger mechanism at play?
Well, to answer that, we turn to a documentary-style analysis from the channel Lungs of Faith. They connect this exact pop culture messaging to devastating real-world demographic data.
Okay, let's hear the data.
They look at the collapse of the replacement birth rate. For a civilization to simply maintain its population, you need a birth rate of roughly 2.1 children per woman.
Right.
Across America, Canada, Poland, Germany, South Korea, those numbers are plummeting into catastrophic territory.
And Lungs of Faith introduces a socio-economic concept they call female homosocial replacement.
Homosocial replacement.
Yeah, homo meaning same, social meaning group.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the vast majority of human history, the trajectory of a woman's life was fundamentally oriented toward the covenant of marriage, building a physical home, and raising children. That was the primary mechanism for identity formation and economic stability.
Yeah. But the source argues that young women are currently undergoing massive cultural conditioning to replace the physical husband and the family structure with two things: their career and their female friend groups.
The anti-wife pipeline is what they call it.
Exactly. They argue that the emotional intimacy, the moral framework, the life advice, and the conflict resolution that traditionally occurred within a marriage are being outsourced. They are outsourced to the Girl Squad, endless therapy speak, astrology, and hyper-consumerist European group tricks.
And the data from Pew Research absolutely verifies this shift in values. Right now, 66% of young women aged 18 to 34 rate success in a high-paying career as one of their major life priorities.
66%.
Yes. If you go back to the late 90s, that number was 56%. If you go back before the 1990s, career success barely registered as a primary life goal compared to marriage and motherhood.
We really have to look at the financial engine driving the shift, though. There is a multi-billion-dollar influencer economy structurally designed to promote this hyper-independence.
Yeah, follow the money.
The Lungs of Faith analysis points to the podcast Call Her Daddy, hosted by Alex Cooper. It promotes a highly transactional, hypersexualized, fiercely independent lifestyle. That podcast recently signed a $125 million distribution deal with SiriusXM.
And who's the largest shareholder in SiriusXM Berkshire Hathaway? Warren Buffett's conglomerate. Why would massive corporate entities and multinational NGOs pour hundreds of millions of dollars into promoting the anti-wife lifestyle?
Because it is economically optimal for the bureaucratic machine. Think about it. A woman dedicated to raising 3 children in a single-income household is sharing resources.
Right. She is cooking at home. She is repairing clothes. She is entirely focused on a microeconomy that doesn't generate massive corporate profit.
But if you can, quote-unquote, unleash that woman into the labor force, she becomes a dual engine of capitalism. She produces labor, and because she is single and isolated, she consumes at maximum capacity.
2 apartments, 2 cars, endless delivery meals, streaming services, therapy bills. The system optimizes for maximum economic utility.
But the psychological devastation of that optimization is just staggering. The analysis points out that Harvard Business School recently invited a prominent OnlyFans creator to lecture students on her business model.
I saw that.
They treated digital sex work as just another innovative girl boss marketing funnel, completely ignoring the profound psychological trauma and societal degradation attached to it.
And Newsweek reported a horrifying statistic on this.
Right.
Roughly 1.4 million American women, which equates to 14% of all women aged 18 to 24, are creating content on platforms like OnlyFans.
14%?
And the real tragedy is they're doing this for an average payout of about $131 a month. It is not empowerment. It is the absolute exploitation of a generation dressed up in the language of liberation.
And this hyper-optimization completely destroys the organic dating marketplace. We have incredible insight from psychologist Dr. Orion Taraban in The Stack today, who exposes the paralyzing cognitive dissonance modern women face.
Right. He reads a letter from a female listener who is entirely trapped by contradictory cultural scripts.
Yeah. Dr. Taraban explains that modern women are being fed an impossible algorithm. On one side, the culture, driven by these podcasts and influencers, tells them to be the nastiest, sluttiest versions of themselves.
Right. They're told to embrace hookup culture and liberate themselves from the quote-unquote oppression of traditional sexual morality to secure high-status men.
But simultaneously, they are warned by the exact same culture not to be prudish or withholding, lest they be labeled toxic or regressive.
So they engage in highly transactional, consequence-free intimacy, and then they are completely bewildered when men treat those interactions as purely recreational rather than the foundation for a long-term committed marriage.
You cannot hack human bonding mechanics. We are biologically and psychologically wired for specific processes of attachment. When you try to override the organic hardware with a manufactured, hyper-individualized software, the system crashes.
Which raises the inevitable next question. If young women are being culturally guided toward corporate careers, homosocial friend groups, and transactional dating, what happens to the men?
They get left behind.
Exactly. When the organic family is dismantled, men are left completely adrift in the void.
And to comprehend the magnitude of what men have lost, we turn to Jordan Peterson's psychological breakdown of the archetypal role of the father.
This was really eye-opening.
We often view parenting purely through the lens of maternal nurturing, keeping the child safe, warm, and protected. But the father's role is fundamentally different.
Peterson argues that a truly good father does not keep his children close for his own selfish emotional comfort. The paramount moral obligation of a father is to prepare the child to face the absolute brutality of the world.
As Peterson says, quote, "A good father is precisely someone who is willing to sacrifice his child to the ultimate good."
And he uses the story of Pinocchio as the perfect psychological metaphor here. Geppetto, the father, is swallowed by the terrifying whale. He descends into the darkest chaos at the bottom of being.
But Pinocchio, the wooden puppet who wants to be a real boy, finds the courage to go down into those depths to rescue him.
Why? Because Pinocchio has been instilled with the unwavering belief of his father. Peterson observes that without the physical and spiritual encouragement of a father, the world is a relentlessly dismal, demoralizing place.
And Peterson highlights the specific physical mechanism of how this courage is built. Rough and tumble play.
I think about this constantly. Men have an intuitive, almost biological drive to wrestle with toddlers on the living room floor. And it isn't just goofing around. It serves a vital, evolutionary, and civilizing purpose.
It is the primary method for teaching a child embodied limits. When a father wrestles with a kid, he extends their physical capabilities, he throws them in the air, he pins them down.
Right.
The child's excitement escalates rapidly until they inevitably push too far and do something that hurts themselves or the father. That is the critical moment. The father has to stop the play and firmly say, "No, that is the limit."
It teaches the child the crucial difference between what actually causes pain and what is merely surprising or difficult.
Right.
Children who are deprived of that physical boundary testing grow up emotionally brittle. They cannot distinguish between a minor inconvenience and an actual catastrophe, so they cry at everything, which renders them entirely unable to socialize or function in the adult world.
A father's evolutionary role is to constantly push the child to the very edge of their competence, to demand the absolute highest standard of behavior, but to undergird that demand with the unspoken promise. I am entirely on your side, and I am doing this to forge the best possible version of you.
But look at the demographic reality today. Millions of young men are growing up in homes completely devoid of that paternal presence. The void is massive, and nature despises a vacuum.
So true.
So if a young man has no father to teach him limits, where does he go to learn how to be a man? He goes to the internet.
And this is where the Lungs of Faith analysis intersects with a deep dive from the channel Contemporary Compendium. Young men are flocking to the manosphere. These are internet influencers who are incredibly adept at diagnosing the pain these men feel. They accurately point out the collapse of societal expectations, the brutal unfairness of modern family courts, and the pervasive lack of masculine purpose.
They diagnose the disease perfectly, but the cure they prescribe is pure poison. The manosphere solutions are completely nihilistic. It's just the male version of the hyper-individualized girl boss logic.
That's a great point.
Instead of prioritize your career and outsource your emotional needs, the male version is spin plates, obsess over your crypto portfolio, and treat women as disposable, depreciating assets. It is still just optimizing for pure selfishness. It is a clenched fist.
However, there is a fascinating subset of young men who recognize the spiritual emptiness of the manosphere. They realize that making money and manipulating women doesn't heal the wounds in their soul.
Right.
So they turn toward religion. But because their entire worldview has been shaped by the digital void, they create something highly problematic: the orthobro.
All right, Contemporary Compendium features this incredible interview with Sar Jonathan, an Orthodox priest, discussing this exact phenomenon. Another priest in the discussion, Pharaoh Justinian, defines the orthobro culture perfectly.
It is a bizarre fusion of internet masculinity culture, influencer economics, identity performance, and selectively weaponized religious vocabulary.
Pharaoh Justinian pulls no punches. He observes that these young men arrive at the church spiritually starved, physically soft, and emotionally malformed. But instead of engaging in the grueling, humiliating work of true repentance, they simply adopt the aesthetic of extreme traditional religion.
It's cosplay. They grow a massive beard, swing kettlebells, listen to Byzantine monastic chants on Spotify, and spend 10 hours a day viciously debating obscure 4th century theology on Twitter.
Pharaoh Justinian calls it a religiously branded form of secular masculinity.
They subordinate the entire Christian faith to the goal of self-optimization. In this mindset, prayer is no longer communion with the divine. It is just discipline maxing. Fasting isn't about breaking your own pride. It is rebranded as testosterone management. It is deeply cynical.
But this is where Pharaoh Jonathan offers a brilliant, challenging pushback. He tells his fellow priests to stop panicking and stop complaining. Yes, these internet aesthetics are ridiculous, but the internet is not a parish.
Right.
When one of these raw, aggressive, internet catechized young men actually walks through the physical doors of a church, it is the fundamental job of the local priest to form them.
Pharaoh Jonathan argues that you cannot blame algorithms for the state of your flock. If a priest complains that these young men are unmanageable, that is a failure of pastoral leadership. You don't let them debate high-level theology. You sit them down and force them into actual physical asceticism.
You make them do the rough and tumble play. You tell them, you want to be a traditional man. Great. Start fasting. Give away your money until it hurts. Sweep the church floors. Serve the poor. You force them out of the performative digital void and crush their egos with the physical reality of humility.
But we also have to acknowledge the deep structural frustrations that drive these men into these rigid internet echo chambers in the first place. The channel Dyer Central highlights a pervasive feeling of selective outrage and societal hypocrisy.
Yeah, Dyer Central analyzes a massive viral controversy involving an e-girl. This was a young woman who had lived a highly publicized, incredibly lucrative lifestyle centered around secular, party-centric, and often sexually explicit content.
Right. And suddenly she pivoted to posting highly performative, deeply moralizing religious content.
And when internet commentators, many of them young men, pointed out the jarring hypocrisy of this sudden pivot without any public acknowledgement of the damage her previous lifestyle promoted, the institutional establishment immediately rushed to her defense.
They viciously attacked the male critics as toxic and abusive.
And again, we are impartially examining the structural argument here for you listening. We are not attacking the specific individual. The core issue Dyer Central identifies is that young men feel they are subjected to a brutal double standard.
Oh, totally.
They are constantly commanded to man up, suppress their frustrations, submit to heavily damaged societal norms, and take absolute accountability for their failings.
Meanwhile, they perceive a culture that treats young women as perpetually blameless victims, even when they engage in behavior that is objectively destructive to themselves and society.
And Dyer Central expands this critique to the massive, often ignored impact of the pharmaceutical industry. He argues that an entire generation is currently being aggressively medicated with SSRIs and hormonal birth control, fundamentally altering their brain chemistry and natural behavioral responses.
He notes that the older boomer generations blindly trust the medical establishment, entirely failing to recognize the chemical reality exacerbating this cultural chaos.
So if we pull back and look at the board, what do we have? We have young men retreating into the rigid, defensive posture of internet orthodoxies. We have young women retreating into the hyper-independent echo chambers of digital feminism.
Both sides are heavily medicated, deeply isolated, and desperately avoiding the terrifying physical messiness of actual accountability and real human relationships.
And that desperation to escape messy reality isn't just an affliction of internet subcultures. It is the defining feature of our most prestigious, elite academic institutions.
Which brings us to the profound disconnect between academic fictions and the brutal reality of the world.
Yes, we are looking at a clip from Slavoj Zizek, the legendary, highly eccentric cultural theorist. Zizek is dissecting the concept of decolonization.
Right now, decolonization is the undisputed supreme intellectual framework in Western European and American universities.
Right.
The academic premise is incredibly flat. Western imperialism was a uniquely evil force, and therefore we must decenter Western thought entirely and uplift the pure, victimized perspectives of the Global South.
What makes this critique so devastating is that Zizek himself is a Marxist. He is not a right-wing commentator, but he is horrified by how Western academia romanticizes the Third World.
He argues that university professors treat these developing nations as unified, pristine victims, almost treating them as ideal fascists united against the colonizers. They completely refuse to acknowledge the ugly, contradictory realities on the ground.
Zizek shares an anecdote that genuinely made my jaw drop. He recounts a debate he had with two high-ranking female officials in the ANC, the African National Congress, the ruling party of South Africa.
Right.
A colleague of Zizek's asked these officials about the catastrophic, horrific rates of violent rape currently plaguing South Africa under their governance.
The response from the ANC official is the absolute zenith of weaponized political correctness. She looked at them and literally said, "What right do you have to talk about rape in my country when you colonized and raped the entire South Africa?"
It is a breathtaking rhetorical magic trick. So Zizek points out exactly what that response accomplishes. It allows corrupt officials to say, do not bring up feminism, do not bring up human rights, do not hold us accountable for our massive governance failures, because those concepts are Western imperialist notions.
And Zizek brings up another stunning example. Burkina Faso. The parliament there unanimously voted to criminalize homosexuality, attaching severe prison sentences.
Right.
And when Western progressive academics attempt to criticize this horrifying policy, the local officials use the exact same academic language against them. They say, no, gay rights are a Western imperialist import. By criticizing us, you are being colonizers.
It perfectly illustrates the map versus the territory problem. Elite academia has drawn a completely flat, perfectly pristine map that says the colonized are pure victims who inherently share our progressive utopian values.
But when you actually step out of the university and try to navigate the jagged, unpredictable, treacherous mountain range of human reality, the map is utterly useless. The territory is vastly more complicated, often brutally contradictory, and deeply uncooperative.
And Zizek notes one final heartbreaking reality about South Africa. When he asked locals about the current devastating economic crisis, one of the ANC officials quietly admitted that among the poorest, most vulnerable black populations, there is actually a growing nostalgia for the era of apartheid.
That completely shatters the entire academic narrative.
Exactly. Not because these people have any affection for racism, apartheid was a horrific evil, but because apartheid was a brutally efficient police state that provided a baseline level of elementary safety and order.
Today, under a supposedly liberated government, they live in a state of total chaotic unsafety. The academic map simply cannot process that level of dark human complexity.
So the academics prefer the map. They prefer the sterile void of their theories to the terrifying physics of reality, which leaves us with a critical problem.
How do we actually engage with this messy, often horrifying reality without losing our moral compass? How do we hold the line when both the internet and academia are peddling illusions?
Well, for the blueprint on how to face reality, we turn to a historical deep dive from Scholastic Answers, focusing on the methodology of St. Alphonsus Liguori.
He was a brilliant moral theologian.
Yes, Liguori wrote a massive comprehensive tract on the Sixth and Ninth Commandments, dealing explicitly with the darkest, most complicated aspects of human sexual morality.
And his approach is the absolute antithesis of a quick, sensationalized internet hot take. Liguori includes a fascinating preface where he writes, "I beg the chaste reader's pardon if he finds more questions and circumstances discussed and declared here. I was therefore obliged for the instruction of those who desire to learn moral science to explain myself clearly, though as chastely as possible."
Liguori understood that dealing with the reality of human corruption requires immense, grueling preparation. It requires systematic, clinical thinking and incredible caution to avoid what theologians call the near occasion of sin.
You do not just shoot from the hip when discussing the darkness of the human heart.
No.
You carefully map out the exact degrees of danger, how proximate the threat is, how remote, how grave. It is the arduous discipline of facing the absolute messiest parts of human nature with clinical precision and deep reverence, rather than sensationalism.
It is about planting your feet firmly in the physical world and refusing to flinch. And speaking of refusing to flinch, we have an incredible historical account from Niels Glenn about an early Christian bishop named Polycarp of Smyrna.
Polycarp is a towering figure. He was a direct student of the Apostle John, and Glenn notes a profound psychological reality about Polycarp. He spent his entire adult life knowing exactly how his story was going to end.
Yeah.
He woke up every single morning in the city of Smyrna knowing with absolute certainty that he would eventually be martyred by the state.
The psychological weight of that is unimaginable.
But he didn't run away. He didn't retreat into a secluded academic theory, and he didn't hide in an echo chamber. He stood firmly at his post. He trained his student. And the historical accounts say that when the Roman soldiers finally came to his house to arrest him, he calmly invited them in and fed them dinner while he prayed.
Polycarp possessed an unshakable clarity about reality. When a prominent heretic named Marcion began gaining influence, Marcion was a man who tried to literally cut the entire Old Testament out of the Bible because he thought the ancient God of Israel was too wrathful and unpalatable for sophisticated Greek sensibilities.
Polycarp didn't try to find a polite compromise. He looked Marcion dead in the eye in the streets of Rome and called him the firstborn of Satan.
He utterly rejected the attempt to sanitize the deep ancient roots of the faith. And at the age of 86, in a city ironically named for the burial spice myrrh, the Roman state burned him at the stake.
And the historical witnesses recorded that as the flames consumed him, the fire smelled distinctly of sweet incense.
He faced the ultimate horrific brutality of the physical world, and he conquered it with an absolute, unyielding spiritual reality.
That triumph of the spirit over the machine brings us to our final synthesizing theme. We have looked at the empty bureaucratic void of the state. We have examined the corporate dismantling of the organic family. We have dissected the performative identities of the internet and the sterile illusions of academia.
The ultimate question is, how do we survive this modern wasteland? How do we fight back?
We have to reclaim the territory of our imagination. We have to remember the old stories. We have a profoundly moving interview from the Matt Fradd Show featuring Malcolm Guite, who is both a poet and a priest.
And Guite provides the exact diagnosis of our cultural sickness. He explains how postmodern philosophy, specifically figures like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, acted as a devastating hermeneutics of suspicion.
Postmodernism introduced the toxic idea that every single human interaction, every ancient story, every historical institution, and every relationship is secretly just a cynical mask for power dynamics and oppression.
They systematically dismantled the meta-narratives, the grand overarching stories that humanity uses to make sense of suffering and existence.
Foucault and Derrida took a sledgehammer to meaning itself. And Guite says that by stripping away our foundational stories, modern people have been left spiritually and culturally dismembered.
We're literally severed limb.
We are isolated fragments of humanity sitting alone in our apartments, endlessly scrolling through disconnected 15-second videos on our phones, desperately wondering why we feel so empty.
And Guite provides the cure. If the disease is being dismembered, the cure is to remember. We have to actively undertake the labor of putting the severed pieces of our history, our culture, and our foundational myths back together into a coherent whole.
To illustrate this, Guite points to one of the most consequential friendships of the 20th century, the bond between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien.
These were two men who intimately understood the horrors of the modern bureaucratic state. They both survived the absolute mechanized slaughter of the trenches in World War I. They watched the state grind millions of young men into the mud of the Somme.
They stared directly into the void. And how did they respond to that trauma? They didn't embrace nihilism. They returned to Oxford. They sat in quiet pubs. They engaged in the deeply contemplative physical ritual of smoking pipes. And they fostered a profound, intellectually rigorous, non-sexualized intimacy of male friendship. And they talked endlessly about myth.
Lewis loved the old pagan myths. He was obsessed with the ancient stories of the dying and rising gods, like Balder in Norse mythology or Adonis. But Lewis was an atheist at the time, and he believed these stories were ultimately just beautiful, comforting lies that humans invented to deal with the fear of death.
But Tolkien corrected him with a theological masterstroke. Tolkien argued that these pervasive pagan myths were not lies at all. They were divine anticipations.
The creator of the universe was deliberately seeding the human imagination with the shape of the ultimate truth, preparing the human heart for what was to come.
Tolkien wrote a poem for Lewis containing the line, "We make still by the law in which we're made." Tolkien explained to Lewis that in the historical event of Christ, the myth finally became history.
The author of reality took the ancient, recurring story of the dying and rising God, and he made it actual, physical, historical reality under the governance of Pontius Pilate.
That singular realization shattered Lewis's worldview and led to his conversion, and it fundamentally informed the masterpiece Tolkien would eventually write, The Lord of the Rings.
Gade points out something utterly unique about Tolkien's work. If you look at almost all ancient mythic quests, Jason and the Argonauts seeking the Golden Fleece, Prometheus stealing fire from the gods,
Right.
the heroic journey is always about acquiring something. It is about gaining power or knowledge or treasure.
But Tolkien flips the entire architecture of the hero's journey upside down. The Lord of the Rings is not an epic of acquisition, it is an epic of absolute renunciation.
The goal of the Fellowship is not to wield the Ring of Power. The goal is to carry the heaviest, most corrupting burden in the world across a hostile landscape, walk up to the edge of a volcano, and let it go.
Glade argues beautifully that this is the exact spiritual medicine our modern world requires. We are currently suffering from a terminal sickness of perpetual acquisition. We are consuming ourselves to death.
We want more money, more optimized efficiency, more digital validation, more control over the uncontrollable variables of our lives.
But true freedom, whether you are fighting the galactic empire, the bureaucratic state, or the deepest, most selfish desires of your own heart, requires the ultimate terrifying act of letting go.
It requires the courage to face what is real. And to bring all of these disparate threads home, we have a short, brilliant quote highlighted by the Patristics channel from the great philosopher G.K. Chesterton.
Chesterton was defending the necessity of fairy tales.
Right? And he wrote, "The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon."
Think about what all these artificial systems of control are actively trying to do. The HR departments, the sterile algorithms, the critical theories in academia.
They all try to sanitize the world.
They try to convince us that the dragon isn't real. They tell us that evil doesn't exist. It's merely a lack of proper education, or a byproduct of Western imperialism, or a correctable glitch in the expected utility matrix of human behavior.
They want you to believe the world is just a spreadsheet. But our souls know the truth. We know the dragon is real. We feel its breath. And the old stories, the deep myths, give us the framework and the courage to actually pick up the sword and fight it.
So let's pull all of this together. The modern world is constantly presenting us with these artificial, incredibly brittle voids. We are navigating bureaucratic states that operate on lifeless, autistic proceduralism.
We are targeted by a corporate media apparatus that is actively dismantling the organic family to create isolated, hyper-individualized consumers.
We are surrounded by internet echo chambers that reduce genuine spiritual longing and masculinity to performative aesthetics, and we are handed sanitized academic maps that refuse to acknowledge the jagged, beautiful, terrifying reality of human nature.
But here is the profound hope for you listening. Human nature naturally, inevitably rebels against this control. It is the physics of reality, true freedom, authentic familial sacrifice, genuine spiritual discipline, and the deep foundational myths.
That is the water.
That is the water. And no matter how tightly the system squeezes its fist, that water will always leak through the cracks of tyranny. The system breaks. It leaks.
As the hosts of the Morning Roundup, our goal is never to just leave you swimming in high-level theory. We want to extract practical, worldview-altering steps that you can take into your life immediately based on this material.
Step 1. Audit your realities.
Oh.
I want you to take a brutally honest look at where you are driving your moral and emotional formation.
Are you outsourcing your identity to performative internet figures, endless podcasts, and highly curated digital echo chambers?
Or are you firmly grounded in real-world relationships, authentic community service, and the physical reality of your family? Turn off the screen, walk outside, and talk to your neighbor.
Step 2. Engage in the rough and tumble. You have to stop avoiding the messiness of reality. That might mean literally getting on the floor and wrestling with your kids to teach them embodied physical boundaries.
Or it might mean having the intellectual courage to face deeply uncomfortable truths like the brutal historical realities Zizek highlights, without desperately filtering them through politically correct academic safety nets. Face the territory as it is, not as the map tells you it should be.
Step 3. Remember your mind. Pick up an old story. Read a classic, unfiltered fairy tale to your children. Dive into a foundational myth, or read a piece of ancient, demanding scripture.
Stop consuming algorithmic, bite-sized, disposable digital slop. Feed your mind something that connects you to the deep, eternal narrative of the human experience.
We want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Look closely at the struggles you are currently facing, in your career, in your marriage, in your spiritual life.
Are the dragons that are terrorizing you actual, tangible beasts that require you to pick up a sword and fight? Or are they just shadows? Illusions projected onto the wall by a hollow, bureaucratic void that is desperately hoping to keep you paralyzed in fear.
That is the question you need to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this massive exploration. We highly encourage you to dive into the original sources linked in today's show notes to explore the incredible depth of these topics for yourself.
And if this deep dive challenged your perspective or brought you value, please remember to like, subscribe, and share the Morning Roundup with someone who needs to hear it.
We will see you back here next time, ready to tear into the next stack. Until then, keep your grip loose, embrace the messiness of the real world, and never forget that the dragon is real.